direct bullet impact to what looks like the medial part of the neck, so the front part, the middle part of the neck. What you worry about, and what I'm sure the surgeons that are attending to Charlie right now are dealing with, are massive bleeding. This is a vascular part of your body.
This is Dr. Vin Gupta providing real-time analysis. This was at the time when it wasn't even clear whether Charlie Kirk had survived the shot or not.
There's big arteries, there's big veins, they're big, and they are really the conduit between our heart and our brain. And so this is critical to make sure that if there's vascular injury, Nicole, that's controlled as quickly as possible, both to preserve Charlie's brain function, and then also just to make sure that he doesn't bleed out.
A major problem with the Tyler Robinson trajectory is that given the type of high-powered rifle we're dealing with and the front-on angle in the lossy sniper's nest scenario and the point of impact from this angle, it doesn't seem to make sense that the round wouldn't exit on the other side. And yet we know the round embedded in Charlie Kirk.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Now the temptation is to immediately assume another angle because something like that just doesn't make sense. And some bright sparks have come up with a brilliant sniper's nest slightly behind the tent. You can see it in this image where the folks immediately below, all they would have to do is glance up at the dude in a ghillie suit standing behind a glass railing. And yes, it really is a glass railing. But what if we are missing some information? Either the type of round or some defect in the barrel or the round itself tumbling. We know, for example, that the shooter engraved words on the casing. Could this alone have affected the trajectory, not only its direction, but also its energy? In this analysis, which is really split into two parts, this is part one, we'll deal with the medical trauma, and in the next part, part two, the ballistics. While in this part we want to deal with the medical injuries as seen through the eyes of the experts. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button. Bear in mind, I am going to be asking you when we get to clue 10 to name clues 1 to 10. So I hope you are making notes in a notebook. By the way, if you don't have a notebook, you can order a TCRS branded notebook on Amazon. I'll put a link to that in the description. And let's get started.
And it wound up here.
Morgan adds that the neck wound Kirk sustained was catastrophic, one that he believes would have been unsurvivable, even with the best medical care immediately on hand.
I'm not really a huge fan of this particular expert, and he's not a medical expert, but I agree that the wound was likely unsurvivable because he likely suffered brain damage in addition to a catastrophic blood loss as well. We'll get to that in a second.
For investigators, the bullet is only the beginning. Morgan says the scenes they now have to process extend far beyond the auditorium where Kirk collapsed.
The site where Charlie was shot, that's going to be your primary scene. The roof is a scene. Where the weapon was deposited is a scene.
When he says the tent where Charlie was shot is the primary crime scene, I disagree. The primary crime scene is where the crime was committed, where the murderer stood, where the murder weapon was deployed, where the murderer lay behind and left behind evidence, DNA, fiber, shoe prints, impressions, perhaps even cell phone signals. The only evidence the murderer left behind in the tent is the slug, the angle, and perhaps the time of the event. Even the victim's body was removed from that particular area. I've heard a few newcomers to true crime suggesting that what stopped the slug in Kirk's body was bone, but I've looked into that. The neck vertebra and the scapula, even if they are involved, and I don't think they are, but even if they are, they just aren't sturdy enough bone to be able to do that. And I don't think changing the angle to fit your theory is the way to go, though. Let's get to the angle now, but let's deal with the injuries from the perspective not of an amateur, not of an expert in terms of forensics, but a medical professional.
There's big arteries, there's big veins, they're big, and they are really the conduit between our heart and our brain. And so this is critical to make sure that if there's vascular injury, Nicole, that's controlled as quickly as possible.
You'll notice in this analysis, he doesn't even mention the word bone, but even a medical professional can make an error in terms of deciding where exactly that point of impact was.
So that's number one. Number two is going to be airway compromise. If that was a direct hit to the middle of the neck, which it looks like it was from afar, I worry about his ability to breathe. And so they're probably going to do an immediate cricothyroidectomy.
Well, as we know now, it wasn't to the middle of the neck, it was to the side, in fact, to some extent more towards the chest side, although the angle was slightly from right to left. And in this case, I wouldn't be surprised if the prosecution used 3D laser scanning to reconstruct the Charlie Kirk shooting to get the exact angle, the exact trajectory, and the exact movement through the body. And then there'll also be the findings of the coroner, right? Again, you'll notice nowhere in this analysis is there even the mention of the word bone. Now let's get a second opinion from, I think it's a spine surgeon.
I'm Ben Bierke. I'm a board-certified spine surgeon, and about a third of my surgeries involve dissecting the anterior neck.
Now you'd think a spine surgeon, given a hammer, everything would be a nail, and Dr. Bierke would imagine some sort of damage to the spine or vertebra. But to his credit, he doesn't.
Charlie was struck with a high-velocity round. This injury is a lot more devastating with a large area of cavitation, not just penetration. I think all the vessels in his neck had probably ruptured, possibly bilaterally. His brain immediately lost all perfusion within a few seconds, most likely.
Again, is there any mention of bone, neck bone, any kind of bone in this description from a surgeon specializing in neck surgery?
We're trained to estimate blood loss. He probably lost about half a liter in the first few seconds. But the more immediate injury was neurological, as we can see with his decorticate posturing, flexion of the arms, and rigid extension of the legs.
I was a little bit doubtful when he spoke about neurological injury, which is, of course, a brain injury. How can you have a brain injury to a situation where a bullet hits you sort of in the upper chest, almost in the neck area? And he uses a term I'm sure most of us have never even heard before, decorticate posturing. So I did some of my own research to find out whether there is a shock wave to the brain when a bullet hits the neck, and the answer is yes. The shockwave from a bullet hitting the neck can cause brain damage, a phenomenon known as ballistic pressure waves or hydrostatic shock. This energy wave travels through the body fluids and tissues, potentially inducing a concussive-like effect that can cause neurological symptoms and long-term damage, even without direct penetration of the brain. This is due to the bullet's kinetic energy transmitting to surrounding tissues as a high-pressure wave or shock wave. The truth is, even in the JFK assassination, the exact nature of the bullet, its movements, and how many bullets were fired remains somewhat ambiguous. In this case, it's far less mysterious, but a mystifying question remains. What slowed down the bullet once it entered Charlie Kirk's neck or upper chest? If it wasn't bone, and it wasn't some imaginative new trajectory,
what was it? What was it?
And we'll deal with that question and hopefully the answer in the next episode, part 2, dealing with the ballistics, which is the number 9 clue everyone missed. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.